was Mary Ann Shadd Cary? We're going to find out in a discussion about her life and her legacy. I'm going to turn the stage over to Dr. Kristin Moriah, who is an assistant professor of African American literature and culture, African diaspora studies, performance studies, sound studies, and visual culture at Queen's University. Kristin, the floor is yours.
Great pleasure, actually, to be here today as part of this really incredible celebration, monumentous occasion. And the first panelist I'd like to invite to the stage is Rosemary Sadlier. Rosemary Sadlier was the president of the Ontario Black Historical Society from 1993 to 2015. As president, she contributed to the recognition of Black history through education, research, and outreach programs. Rosemary's pressure was central to the Canadian government's 1995 decision to make the celebration of Black History Month a national event. Rosemary was born and raised in Toronto, and she has degrees in teaching and social work. Her roots in Canada reach back to pre-Confederation. Her mother's family can be traced to 1840, while her father's ancestors arrived in New Brunswick in 1793. Along with the 1995 establishment of National Black History Month in that same year, Sadlier also initiated the formal celebration of August 1st as Emancipation Day, which is still being celebrated nationally. For Rosemary, such events have helped and will continue to help Canadian students and teachers recognize the contributions of Black people in Canada. Rosemary has presented nationally and internationally, including to the United Nations, on the subjects of Black Canadian history, curricula, and anti-racism. She has also researched and written prolifically about Black history and Black Canadian history. Rosemary has received several honors and awards, including the Order of Ontario, the William Peyton Hubbard Race Relations Award, Women for Pace Award, the Black Lynx Award, the Planet Africa Marcus Garvey Award, and the Harry Jerome Award. Most recently, she was awarded the Lifetime Achiever Award from the International Women's Achievers Awards. Thank you very much for being here today, Rosemary. To her left is Professor Walcott, Professor Rinaldo Walcott. I still feel like I should call you Professor Walcott, even though you were not my personal professor. He is chair of Africana and African American Studies at the University of Buffalo, where he holds the Carl V. Granger Chair in Africana and American Studies. He's a writer and critic, and his research is in the area of Black diaspora cultural studies, gender and sexuality, with interest in nations, nationalisms, multiculturalisms, policy, and education broadly defined. As an interdisciplinary Black studies scholar, Walcott has published in a wide range of venues on everything from literature to film to theater to music to policy. His articles have appeared in scholarly journals and books, as well as popular venues like newspapers, magazines, and online media sources. And he often comments on Black cultural life for TV and radio. Walcott has edited or co-edited multiple works, including Rude, Contemporary Black Canadian Cultural Criticism. Walcott is the author of Black Like Who, Writing Black Canada. In 2021, Walcott published The Long Emancipation, Moving Towards Freedom, and On Property, Policing, Prisons, and the Call for Abolition, which was nominated for the Heritage Toronto Book Award, long-listed for the Toronto Book Awards, a Globe and Mail Book of the Year, and listed in CBC Books as Best Canadian Nonfiction of 2021. Walcott's foundational article about Mary Ann Shadd Cary, Who is She and What is She to You? Mary Ann Shadd Cary and the Impossibility of Black Canadian Studies remains an important touchstone in the field of Black Canadian Studies. Thank you so much for being here. So because you two have such a deep background in both education and scholarship, we really wanted you to be able to help to shed light on Mary Ann Shadd Cary's background for so many of the people here who will be listening. And it would be great to just talk about how you yourselves first learned about Mary Ann Shadd Cary and her impact.
That is such a... Can you hear me? Are we good? Yes, okay. Well, I first came to know about Mary Ann Shadd Cary only because I actually went to church. And my church was a Black church, and we would have conferences that would have us moving around the province. So in the process of leaving Toronto, which is my home, and making my way to a conference, a church conference, we would often find ourselves in Windsor, or in Chatham, or in Buxton. And in the process, the name Shadd would come up frequently, all the time. But I don't think that it meant anything to me because there were so many, as you've already pointed out in the earlier panel, there were already so many incredibly strong and amazing African Canadian women in our midst. But for me, they were all connected to church because we were not included in other aspects of society in Toronto in a regular and routine way. But I think when she became meaningful to me in terms of being a historical figure and having an impact was when I had the opportunity to see some of the materials written by Dr. Daniel G. Hill, who was a founder of the Ontario Black History Society. And his book, Freedom Seekers, was an opportunity to find tidbits of all kinds of amazing things that would really pique your interest. So when I was later approached to write a book, one of 7, she was going to be included for sure, and she was always going to be part of any Black history presentation that I would go on to do later on.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. This is amazing. I have to say that when I wrote that essay in 2000, but was doing the research for it in the late 1990s, I would never imagine something like this happening. So this is amazing. I have to begin there. So how do I come to Shadd Cary? Well, in a couple of ways. One is that the 1990s in Toronto was a really interesting and magical time. There was a kind of historical, literary, music, cultural renaissance happening. And so Austin Clarke came back into publishing. The Nathaniel Dett Chorale was founded. Rosemary Sadlier here, and Afua Cooper, and Adrienne Shadd, and Carlin Smarts Frost, and others were doing all of this groundbreaking research. And interestingly enough, we were all kind of bumping into each other in all kinds of places. And people would often whisper to me that Adrienne's last name was an important last name. And so we would be hanging out and people would like whisper this to me. And I had just written this book called Black Like Who, and some people thought that it was too Toronto-centric, but one of the things that I did in that book was I was searching around for what I called at the time grammars for Black in Canada. And what I wanted to do was to find figures, transitional figures, that deepen Black people's relationship to Canada beyond the post-World War II arrivals. And so I started looking to see what was in the Black abolitionist papers. I started looking around in Robin Winks's book for figures that I could work with. And the late Austin Clarke said to me, well, you should just work with Shadd. And so I went off and tried to find as much as I could find about Shadd. And the thing about what was happening in that Renaissance, there was this white PhD student from McMaster, Richard Admonte, and I don't know where he is now. But he republished Shadd's plea with an introduction. He also republished Thomas Smallwood's narrative, slave narrative, the only slave narrative written and first published in Canada with an introduction. And it was because he did that work that it allowed me to turn to Shadd and to think about what Shadd might mean for thinking about Black presence in Canada that also had a migratory story to it, but in a way that could be a building block for thinking about the long presence of Black people in Canada beyond the way in which multicultural discourse positions it as basically 1960s and after.
You know, it's clear for both of you that Shadd is such an important figure, right, in thinking through Blackness in Canada, these Black histories that have been erased from public discourse in a way. I'm wondering if you have any ideas about why we don't know more about Mary Ann Shadd Cary, why more people still don't know about her and her important work.
The really, really easy answer is because we still just don't know Black history. That's the real bottom answer there. Let me just add a piece here that is not Mary Ann Shadd focused. This is also the 400th year since the birth of the first child who was enslaved, and we have a name for, and who arrived in Canada at 8 years of age. We don't talk about that. I just came from Quebec City, where we were able to finally, my initiative to have him recognized as a person of national historic significance. It's, Olivier Lejeune, remember that name too, an 8-year-old child. So if we can't talk about the thing, the person, the significance of that opening chapter that created the underpinnings of everything that we have now, 200 years of enslavement in this place we now call Canada. So Mary Ann Shadd shows up, after the fact, right? And not that that's good or bad, but it's after the fact. So this terrible history that we don't talk about, that we don't recognize, we can kind of, just move from when she arrives. And at the time, of course, the issue was about ending slavery, not so much in Canada, but everywhere else. The issue was not about, it was about a place where we could all live and flourish. And that was a bit problematic because there were two significant viewpoints. One, remain in the United States and build there. And the other, leave the United States, no hope of seeing any change, and try and make things better in a new place that promises freedom under the law. That was Mary Ann's approach. I think the other part that impacts Mary Ann Shadd and our knowing her story is the fact that, has already been pointed out, she was a woman. And women, even during the time of the Black Power movement, tended to be less spoken about. Women were mothers, but that wasn't spoken about. But they were activists, they were thinkers, they were visionaries. And she happened to be non-traditional in her approach. So she was not the person that people were going to hold up to be the right person to support necessarily as history documents people going forward.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that too is that when you read Mary Ann Shadd Cary's plea, one of the things that's really clear is that she's not a figure who's really interested in being slotted into any particular national space. In the plea, she makes the claim that all of North America is a home to Black people. And so when we recover these figures, I've done it too, I've been susceptible to it. We often recover them as national figures, but really she is a disturber of national boundaries. And when you read the plea, and it was said earlier, Mary Ann Shadd Cary was a person who disturbed a whole bunch of things. She challenged the male abolitionists. She challenged questions of how we would think about race, and she refused race as a racial category. So she pushed her philosophical understanding of the world is a challenge to many of the things that we desire to make us feel certain and known. And so there's a way in which that she could easily go missing in that way. But in terms of the Canadian context, like there are only two other women who I think in terms of the national imaginary of Canada who can, Secord and Moody, and Susanna Moody and Laura Secord. And of course, in some ways, Shadd is a contemporary of theirs, and her contributions are far more significant, and yet they occupy so much space in the national imaginary.
It's funny because I was speaking to a colleague earlier this week, Nika Denny, who has just published an anthology of Mary Ann Shadd Cary's writing, and it's the first scholarly annotated anthology of Mary Ann Shadd Cary's writing. And so if you can, grab a copy of it. But during the book launch, I was saying to Nika, you know, one of my favorite and most funny Shadd moments is reading a review of her first pamphlet, Hints to the Colored People of the North, because it's reviewed in the North Star, in Frederick Douglass's newspaper, by her mentor, and the review is actually terrible. The reviewer savages her and says, you know, a lot of people are talking about this, and what they're saying is actually, I haven't paid any money for it, and if I had known that it was available for cost, I would not, in fact, have paid any money for it. It was truly rough. Right? And so just to imagine that as a young person, right, in your early 20s, you're starting a public life as a writer, as a woman in the mid-19th century, actually facing that kind of criticism and that pushback, right, that early on sort of denial of your talents and your ability to speak in public, to me is just incredible, right, to go from that to here. As we close up, I wonder if you have any of your own personal favorite Shadd moments, any of her major accomplishments that you think that people should hold on to or that strike you as being as significant.
I think the fact that she was such an independent thinker and really acted on her own conviction, and she wasn't swayed by populist opinion at all, I think is incredibly important. That she was committed to hard work and was prepared to roll up her own sleeves in order to make things happen. But that independent view is what adds to our not knowing as much about her. I suspect that as much as she was supported initially and worked with Frederick Douglass, the fact that she countered him in as much as in this very city, there was a fundraiser held by white abolitionists in support of Frederick Douglass and his paper and his perspective, which basically encouraged black people to go back to the United States. And she was having a fundraiser for her initiative and the provincial Freemen. And the only people who came out to support her were people who were poorer, the black population. So she had to wonder, what are you doing, Toronto? I came here because you are the abolitionist center, and this is why you support me? So people may not have appreciated that opportunity for her to call them out. And she also was countering Frederick Douglass, who, you know, later went on to be Consul General for Haiti, has supported every step of his process. History was not going to be kind to a woman who challenged the approved narrative. But I think it's important for us to always remember that it's important to follow what you believe, no matter what the consequences. Because at the end of the day, how do you have integrity? How do you have authenticity in your own beliefs if you don't do that?
Yeah, I want to follow from that to say that Shadd is an inspiring figure because she could disagree without being disagreeable. And I think that sometimes that's lacking in how we think about formations of black community, that there's a resistance to people being publicly disagreeing. And so that's one thing that I take from Shadd that's really important. I'd be remiss if I don't mention Sylvia Sweeney's film of 1997, which also helped many of us to recover Shadd as an important intellectual. And that for me is the thing that's really important about Shadd, that when you read The Plea for Immigration, what you're reading is a philosophy of Black life in North America. And so Shadd for me is this figure that opens up both the past of Black life in Canada and the future. She is a foundational building block for thinking about how we can talk about a continuous Black life in Canada, one that's routed through migration, but one that's not only about migration, because she understands all of North America as the site of Black life.
Fantastic. I think as we close, Rosemary, I wonder if you would like to share something with us from your work?
I just wanted to add that somebody reminded me that my book, one of my early books, was probably the first African-Canadian publication on Mary Ann Shadd. And listening to you speak earlier, it was built on some of the research also that Bearden had done, which I couldn't have remembered or couldn't have realized had come from your own discovery. So a combination of that. And one quick piece, to write in Canada, to do research, I applied to the Toronto Arts Council and the Ontario Arts Council in order to get the money to go to Washington to do the research. It took a long time to get the money. When I got the money, I had my third child by this time, and I got to go to Howard University, Spingarn Library, with my son, my third child, who was still nursing, a stroller, and all the diaper bags and everything. So when I got to the library, they didn't want to let me in because I had a baby with me. And it had taken me a year to get my money to go to Washington. And I thought, oh, Mary Ann Shadd had trouble at Howard too. But they let me in. And my son thankfully slept through my whole period of research, and hence the book. But thanks.
That's amazing. Thank you. Yes, yeah, please.
One last thing that I want to say is that, when I say this is amazing, I really mean that. To think like 20 years ago, 20-something years ago when I wrote that essay, I subtitled it Impossibility of Black Canadian Studies, as a way of saying that Black Canadian studies was indeed possible. And as we celebrate Shadd today, I should note that at Queen's, at Dalhousie, at Guelph, at a number of Canadian universities now have Black studies programs. So Black studies is possible, and people like Mary Ann Shadd should be foundational to those programs.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. It's so invigorating to be here and to be working in one of those programs and to be sharing the stage with you two, both icons. So thank you so much for being here today.